And those testifying today, we have your testimony. If you could please try not to read the testimony word for word, try to summarize what you provided us. We would appreciate that. I'm going to hand it over to Chairman Kale.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all the members that are here today. As you can see by where these members are coming from, that this is an issue that is one that is taken very seriously by the House of Representatives. We have members from Chester County, many members from Allegheny County, members from Cambria County. I do truly appreciate everyone coming here today, and I also appreciate the administration sending the acting secretaries here today. That we recognize that is you guys are very busy, you have a lot going on, and that you are taking this matter very seriously, and it's very, very much appreciated. Me as a legislator, me as the chair of this policy committee, the Republican Policy Committee, and for me as a father that lives about 10 miles from here, that has 8 children, that is concerned about our ground and our water and our air as well. So thank you. Without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Chairman Matze, who is also a Beaver County representative. Chairman Matze.
Thank you, Chairman. Appreciate the attendance here today to hear this testimony. I think the key ingredient for today is for us as policymakers to learn. We as members have been talking together about what we can do from the state's perspective as it pertains to incident command and emergency response, but also what we can do relative to rail safety. There are a lot of concerns and questions out there as it pertains to rail safety and what we can do as a state rather than at the federal level, but we will explore each and every option available to us as we continue this dialogue and gather more and more information. So we appreciate the testifiers, the members for coming out here, and as Chairman Bizzarro said, the members on both sides of the aisle must really like Chairman Matze and Chairman Marshall to come out to Beaver County on a cold, blustery morning. But as I like to say, when members come to Beaver County in my district, it's still always sunny here in Beaver County. So we thank the members from coming from all over the state to hear this very important testimony about a very important topic. Thank you so much. Chairman Marshall.
Thank you, Chairman Matze. Again, I would like to thank both chairs of the House Republican and House Democrat policy committees for having this bipartisan event on such an important topic. Thank Governor Shapiro's administration for sending the best of the best here to give us the opportunity to learn from them. I'm sure the audience will learn from the testifiers today as we gather information. Appreciate all those members here in person and also the members that are virtually with us online. So thank you again, Chairman, and we're ready when you are.
The meeting's yours.
Thank you, Chairman. We'll start with the state agencies, and we'll begin with the Director of Pennsylvania Emergency Management, Director Randy Padfield.
Thank you, Chairman Marshall. And good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for the opportunity to sit before you with my colleagues here at the table to discuss and answer questions regarding the Norfolk Southern train that derailed in East Palestine, Ohio on Friday, February 3rd. Since the initial notification of the derailment that Friday evening, our agencies have been involved in the response and recovery efforts in support of the residents of Pennsylvania and remain committed to ensuring that their needs are addressed and questions are answered. To say that the incident has been complex would be a gross understatement. It occurred just hundreds of feet from the Pennsylvania state line, involved the response of hundreds of first responders and multiple agencies that responded that night, 2 separate EPA regions, 2 separate FEMA regions, a private corporation, its contractors, and federal, state, and local government agencies and officials. Since the incident occurred in Ohio, many of the decisions on how to appropriately manage it were outside of any one local, county, or state agency's control from a Pennsylvania perspective. Early in the response, PEMA, Department of Environmental Protection, Department of Health closely monitored the situation and remained prepared to assist the impacted counties with managing any consequences as a result of the derailment to protect Pennsylvania residents. State agency personnel were present at the command post in East Palestine within the first hours of the incident. Frequent updates were provided through personnel on site, county officials, and federal EPA regarding the ongoing situation. And information was exchanged freely between agencies so that we could plan for any contingencies that may have been needed in response to the incident. We understand that the decision to implement the controlled vent and burn of the 5 vinyl chloride cars to avert the potential of an uncontrolled release of product was extremely concerning, and that many residents and elected officials in the room today have questions regarding what led up to that decision, the potential health, safety, and environmental concerns as a result of that decision, and what is being done to address them. While we do not yet have all the answers to everyone's questions, much has been accomplished by all the agencies here, which you'll hear in a little bit, involved in the response, and the picture has been getting clearer. But there is still much to do to be able to help us understand the true impact. We are committed as a group of state agencies to ensuring the health and the safety of all residents and preserving our environment for the residents of the Commonwealth, and stand ready to answer any questions.
Thank you. Acting Secretary of Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection, Richard Negrin.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you to all the representatives here today, and thank you to the citizens who have come to fill this room on a snowy day. I think it lays bare the importance of this issue for all of us. Since February 3rd, I think we're in day 38, we have been continuously working with our partners, monitoring. Air monitoring was up within 12 hours. I had folks on the scene, DEP employees who were there really within 2.5 hours on site with handheld monitors as well. Whether it's the air that is ongoing today, whether it's the surface water and the groundwater testing that we've done, we're now in the second mile testing of private ground water and those private wells. DEP does not normally regulate private wells. We made an exception in this case because of the gravity of this incident and made an early decision. Very early on, the governor made an early decision to do just that. So we're doing something we've never done before. We think this is an extraordinary event, and it required an extraordinary response. And I know there's been a lot of talk about the 1 mile and the 2 mile. We've not turned down people who want their wells tested and have concerns and have been calling us, and we've made that incredibly clear. The good news is many of those calls have been going considerably down, and we're seeing results. And I want to be really as clear about one thing. If you remember one thing I say today, it's that we have had literally thousands of data points. And when you look at all the testing, we just started the soil testing. We'll talk about that in a little bit with the Department of Agriculture, which is incredibly important in terms of where we're going with our farms and making sure that our livestock and our produce are safe going into the future. But when you look at all of the testing, whether it's the air, whether it's the partnership with EPA, whether it's the testing that we're doing on groundwater and surface water, whether it's the soil testing that we started just last week, there's now thousands of data points that we have gotten results on, and all that is being made available and put on our website. And all of them show that there are no measurements that have exceeded safety thresholds for short-term exposure. Really important for the public to understand. Now, I want to be really clear about what that means. That's about short-term exposure, about the incident and then the burn. That does not mean that we're letting our guard down in terms of what we're going to do going forward. We're going to be groundwater the way it is, and folks have heard me talk about this before. We got very lucky here. Not only would this train have been in Pennsylvania in just a few short minutes going through your district, but the groundwater runs, the hydrogeologists tell me that the groundwater runs obviously east to west. So we're fortunate in a lot of different reasons, and I know Randy and I that night when we were having this conversation, there were a number of times that the wind conditions were clearly favorable for us, in a manner that has really helped us around that short-term exposure. That doesn't mean that we're not going to continue to long-term monitor, right? I think the groundwater, the readings we're taking today, it's important for folks to understand we're getting favorable readings, but groundwater takes a lot longer than just a few weeks in order to see if anything from the site that has occurred because of the distance is going into the groundwater in Pennsylvania. So we're going to continue to monitor those private wells. We're setting up monitoring wells as well to go well into the future, and there's no plan to stop that. We're going to look at the results and make those decisions as they occur. So I think it's important for folks to understand that we're not going anywhere. I also think it's important for folks to understand that proximity matters. So the reason why we focused on the 1 mile and the 2 mile is because if we're going to see contamination, we're going to see it there first as it kind of leaches further and further away from what we call ground zero in East Palestine. So we're going to continue to monitor things. If we are to see some contamination in groundwater into the future, we should see it within those 2 miles first. That's how it should work. That doesn't mean we're not going out and testing and making sure that we're doing that. Public water sources have been tested, and we're going to continue to do that. I've got Brian Moore, who I want to just point out. He's not up on the panel, but Brian, just raise your hand. Here, who's my director of emergency response, who can speak to if you have questions around specific. There are so many chemicals that were involved. Brian has been kind of my expert around what they are. We heard a lot about vinyl chloride. We've heard a lot about phosgene and things of that nature, which are incredibly toxic and very dangerous chemicals. But there are a lot of chemicals that were on that train, and a lot of things that we're monitoring, literally in the hundreds of numbers. And Brian is prepared to help answer some of your questions if you have questions around what we're testing for specifically. But the big assurance that you have for me today, and I'm going to stop talking because I promised I was only going to talk for like 2 or 3 minutes, and I've already gone over that, is that we're not going anywhere. We're going to continue to be diligent. We're going to continue to work with some of our great partners here. I know that the commissioners are here. Both Commissioner Manning, Commissioner Camp have been great partners. Obviously, Representative Marshall, we've been talking a great deal around all of this. I think this is my 6th time in the region. And I think we'll continue to come out here and make sure that the people of this area are okay. With that, I will turn it over to my colleague in the Department of Health.
Thank you. Thank you, Secretary Nagrin, and thank you for Wes as well, who's from your office. Been very helpful. Acting Secretary to PA Department of Health, Dr. Deborah Bogan, please begin.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay? So thank you, Chairman Bizzaro, Kale, Marshall, and Matsy, and all the other representatives who are here today. I'm here representing the Department of Health, and we have been part of the response since the very beginning. Our staff at the Health Department have been reviewing, assessing, and making recommendations on data from a variety of sources, including the DEP and the EPA. We've had over 50 members of our staff participating in the response from a variety of our bureaus. We have been, like others have said, in near daily contact with federal, state, and local officials on this partnership. I think I want to spend most of my time talking about the Health Resources Center that's been opened here just down the hall since February 28th. The Health Resource Center has really been here for residents to access healthcare providers, emergency behavioral health services, spiritual support, and to get answers to their questions about environmental exposures, about their pets, farm animals, air quality, and really just talking to staff from the Department of Agriculture and the Department of Environmental Protection, as well as the Health Department. So this effort really, I want to highlight and thank the local partners who've really been here making this a success. I am a healthcare provider myself, and I know it takes a lot of time and positive experiences for people to gain trust. And so it's really important that we empower the local response to really provide the vast majority of the response. So I just want to thank some of the local resources that have been here on the ground, boots on the ground at the Health Resources Center. You've had Dr. Garrow and his team from the Primary Health Network, a very large federally qualified health center in your area. You have Herda Matter and the team from Beaver County Behavioral Health Services that have been here every day, and local pastors from Beaver County Christian United. And then we've had volunteers, Chris Anderson and volunteers from the Pennsylvania State Medical Assistance Program who've augmented clinical services as well. So really boots on the ground, local folks helping. As of today, we've had over 500 people come through the Health Resources Center, which speaks to the need for this resource to be here. Over half have been 60 or older. They come from about 25 different zip codes across the Commonwealth, and a few from Ohio. Upon entry, people are asked why they're here and what resources they're interested in, and 63% have requested support from the Department of Environmental Protection, and about 10% from the Department of Agriculture. 28% have sought clinical evaluation, so over 125 people have had clinical evaluations by the medical team. 14 wanted general health information, and 1% sought behavioral health support. However, after they've gotten here, people have taken advantage of what is here. And so I'll give you an example. So only 1% came in saying they wanted behavioral health support, but 15% have received behavioral and spiritual support when coming here. So in collaboration with our partners at the CDC and ATSDR, we have been conducting an assessment of chemical exposure survey, also called the ACE survey. And this survey allows our epidemiology teams, both here and at the CDC, to carefully assess any symptoms, experiences, and concerns about the impact the train derailment has on their individual lives. The ACE survey has been done in a variety of ways. First, we went door to door out to residents in Beaver County in a 1-mile radius. People have come to the Health Resources Center and completed the survey here, and we have information on how to assess it via phone or on paper or online. So far, we've had 143 people complete the survey as of Sunday. Their median age is 61. And interestingly, 85% have reported at least one symptom that has started either worsened since the train derailment or started since the train derailment. And the top 3 complaints are headache, anxiety, and ear, nose, and throat symptoms. And among the residents who have pets, 31% have reported observing symptoms in those pets. We have also been, one of the questions is, how is this train derailment impacting you? And 68% of respondents indicated they were not planting or were unsure of planting their gardens this summer as a result of concerns. They've also raised concerns about water, soil, and air quality, long-term health effects, questions about clinical testing, how to clean their homes. So really a wide variety of questions have come through the Resource Center. We also, in addition to doing resident surveys, the ACE survey is also being given to first responders, and that survey kicked off a little bit later on March 5th. And the same survey is being done in Ohio, so we have some information from both. But as of March 11th, we've had 87 Pennsylvania first responders complete the survey. 82% were firefighters and 8% were for hazmat teams. And about half have reported at least one symptom, the most common being ear, nose, and throat kinds of symptoms as well. One other thing I think has been, again, the response to the Health Resource Center, over 500 people, means there was really a need to be here. And although the numbers have started out about 100 a day, they are dwindling and they're down to the teens now. So we're hoping we're meeting the needs of people. The other thing, after talking to some local physicians here, it became clear that they were also getting a lot of questions from people and wanting to know how to respond. And so the Department of Health, along with other partners, including the Poison Control Center, we held 3 webinars geared towards physicians and healthcare providers in the community. And like the Health Resource Center, we had a pretty brisk response. We put out the call for this on a Saturday, and by Tuesday we had over 580 people who responded to participate in our health education webinars. And they came from 17 Pennsylvania counties. And the webinars provided answers to physicians and healthcare providers' questions. So I think, again, there was an important need for that. And we did share our slides and resources. And again, as we get more information, we can reach those 580 plus healthcare providers who registered with ongoing information, which we're doing. We also distributed an advisory targeted to physicians in a larger area through our health advisory network. And we've been attending the open houses that have been held by the EPA. So that's been the response of the health department. We also are going to continue to be here and respond as people need. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Bogan. And next we have Secretary of Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture, Russ Redding. Russ?
Yeah, good afternoon, and thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. Thanks for the opportunity to be here and to be with my colleagues again back in Beaver County to talk about this issue. I'll have to say that from the first hearing we had several weeks ago to today, I mean, there's been tremendous progress, and I just want to acknowledge the work of the administration, the EPA, our partners, the community, the county commissioners, township, and make your list. And really felt when we left last time. There were so many unanswered questions, and today, while there are still unanswered questions, right, that list is shrinking. And what's been demonstrated, particularly for me, is just the partnership across the agencies, across levels of government. We all know that folks don't differentiate between levels of government, right? It's about each of us and our responsibilities, and feel like we are at a place today where there's a respect and understanding, a division of labor between and among each of us, and I want to say thank you to all. Certainly the health and safety of the citizens and as well as the companion animals and livestock are part of this conversation. That is most important to us. We have been in constant contact across the region, and want to say thank you to the Beaver County Farm Bureau, Cliff Wallace, who's the president here, to say thanks. I mean, he's been on the ground and ground truthing sort of what it is that we're doing, what are we hearing, confirming what we have had as direct calls or feedback through, the Resource Center, and just giving us a hand. So just want to say thank you to Cliff and the entire Beaver and Lawrence County Farm Bureau for their help. We've also, just given the proximity, have been in contact with the Ohio Department of Agriculture and our colleagues there. Certainly making sure that we're comparing notes, that we're sharing what we learned back and forth between states and agencies. As we speak to our federal partners, particularly in the U.S. Department of Agriculture or the Federal Food and Drug Administration or EPA, that we are speaking as an industry, not as a state, with ignoring the state line, and that has been really important. So Dr. Bogan mentioned the Resource Center, and again, I think it's been incredibly helpful to both deal with the intake, but also the outtake, if you will, of just comments and perspectives, right, of what we can do or need to do. And I want to say thank you to Mark Kritz, as our regional director here in the Western PA, for being part of the center in that triaging of questions as well. We established a hotline for agricultural questions and issues several weeks ago, and that number we can share at 855-777-6735 for those who are watching online. That, is, again, has been really helpful to capture questions and concerns from the community. We have fielded questions of animal health and crop health, food safety concerns, contacting the department. We will certainly try to get you to the right entity. I mean, admittedly, not all of those issues are held within the Department of Ag. They may be an Ag issue, but they're not within the PA Department of Ag, so we want to make sure we're getting you to the right place. Our goal has been really to assure the farm operators that they can continue to operate safely, and of course, and consumers have the trust in those products, and that is critical. The foundation of a safe food supply is safe air and safe water and safe soil, right? They are the foundational elements that we have been focused on and continue to be to this day. On soil sampling, as Secretary Negrin noted, we have been soil sampling initially inside the 1 and 2 mile zone at the encouragement of the Cliff Wallace and the Beaver and Lawrence County Farm Bureau. We've reached beyond that to, again, following the plume and the soot maps as noted. We have taken additional samples in those in that grid, I'll just say, and that is, again, at the direction of and encouragement of Farm Bureau, but also in partnership with EPA and DEP. I'll just say that the soil sampling will continue until there's clear and convincing understanding of what has happened here in East Palestine and the surrounding communities. Again, there's more to do, right? There's a lot of real estate in this area. There's a lot of real estate that's been impacted by it, but we want to make sure that we're making very strategic and informed decisions. We'll use the analysis of the initial samples to guide us where to go. On the animal health side, again, we have not seen significant issues. We have been in constant contact with the private veterinarians since the very early days of the derailment. We continue to monitor that through the private vets to our state veterinarian in the Bureau of Animal Health and Diagnostic Services. And of course, for those who have been familiar with the department, we have the Animal Health and Diagnostic System which links both our veterinary school at Penn Vet with our land-grant university at Penn State and the diagnostic lab in Harrisburg. That is the system that we're using. Most important for the private veterinarians, if you see an issue, production animal or companion animal, is to move that through and to our state Bureau of Animal Health, and then we can triage that with our respective animal health labs. But at this point, we have not seen those issues, right? A few concerns, but not serious issues. We'll continue, though, to monitor that. And as we all know, that maybe those health effects are not immediately obvious. With time, maybe there are issues of concern, so continue, please, to monitor. Most important, I think, in this conversation is around food safety. We have engaged directly with the commissioner and team at the Food and Drug Administration on a direct ask of the Shapiro administration to engage with us. That has been incredibly fruitful. They have provided feedback and established an incident management group that is tied into the incident management team to make sure that they are monitoring food safety concerns from what is packaged and processed, but also what is on the field or in production. And they have pledged to us that their continued support for that. They have provided points of contact for us as well. So they stand ready. That is a change from when we were here last. And just today, further engagement with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, given the issues of soil and water and crops, as well as livestock that may be in production system. So I just say that we are focused on those foundational elements. Certainly the testing and analysis of soil, air, and water will guide us, but we are engaged with our colleagues both here at the state and the federal government to make sure that we're doing everything that we can to give the assurances to both those who are producing the products and those consuming it, that it's safe. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. We will begin taking questions from members for the panel, but before we do, I want to remind everyone that this is an active fire department who had a call this morning. I want to thank the first responders for that service and for letting us use their truck bay today. They may get one during this hearing, and they may have service on the equipment during this hearing. Just want to remind everyone that it is an active site, and thank you again to them, the township supervisors, and of course the residents of Darlington for that too. My first question is for Dr. Deborah Bogan. I've had several people reach out to me with health concerns from the beginning of the incident until just today. I had two, one from a first responder, another from a citizen. Both have been here at this resource center. Obviously, I want to thank Governor Shapiro for that resource center and for having your team here. And you've said you've done surveys. Has there been any diagnosis? Is there any connection between the coughs, the sore throats, headaches to this, or is it too soon to say?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think it is too soon to say. We're still collecting surveys. We're going to collect surveys through the end of the month. And then really it's a matter of going back and looking at what those surveys show. Is there a pattern? And the information will be gathered and analyzed, and we should have some results, I hope, within a couple of weeks of finishing the surveys. I too have heard about people who have exposures, especially acutely during the fire events and inhalation. So we are monitoring. We're not making, I don't have any data on diagnoses specifically, more about what people are complaining of. And again, I think that speaks to the results I shared with already that, I'm trying to remember the actual data I said, but 85% reported some symptom acutely. And whether those symptoms have resolved at this point or not, I don't have that information. I also just want to say that also, the team here at Darlington Township has been really wonderful and welcoming to all the staff here. It's been very, very busy here, and I understand this is normally a fairly quiet place, so I just want to say thank you for their generosity of spirit and community that's really impressive in this community. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bogan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I ask my question, note the presence of a few members that walked in. We have Representative Dan Miller, first responder himself, is our Democratic whip, majority whip. We also have Matt Gergley from Allegheny County and Danielle Frawatton from the Southeast, so we thank you all for making the journey here. My question, Randy, if you could paint the picture for the members. Timeline, incident, Pennsylvania finds out. What happens? You know, I mean, I know it sounds very elementary from a question perspective, but I think it will help us. And I've heard responses when we've had our conversations, but I think it will be helpful for the members who haven't had that opportunity. So timeline from the incident to Pennsylvania's response, incident command to today, basically.
Sure. So thank you for the question. So we'll back it up to the night of the incident. So we were aware early on, Beaver County, we have what's called the Pennsylvania Emergency Incident Reporting System. So there are certain criteria to be able to report incidents to our 24/7 Watch and Warning Center. So Beaver County put an incident in regarding their response because it was a significant mutual aid response across the state line for the train derailment. We also at the same time had notification regarding the train derailment in East Palestine. So we were tracking that from early on. I think the original watch report came in between 9:30 p.m. and maybe 9:45. And then we continued to be able to, EPA Region 3 reached out to our watch center. DEP was aware of it, and they really have a separate timeline, but it was really responsible independent action on behalf of one of their emergency response personnel that heard about it on the news and actually responded to the site. So we had good information at that point in time, and probably about 2 o'clock in the morning, early Saturday morning, Director Moore woke me up along with Secretary Negrin to be able to discuss the concerns, because the original information, just like any large, complex incident, it takes a while to be able to get the details. And we had a clearer picture probably at about 2 o'clock in the morning that, there was a potential to be able to impact individuals within Beaver County and within the Commonwealth. So we monitored that. We were in communication with Director Brewer and his staff to be able to get information regarding the incident. And then we were also exchanging information throughout the night and the early morning hours regarding EPA, regarding air monitoring that was being established. Beaver County Hazmat Team actually had their area array out there, so there was preliminary air monitoring data that we were looking at. And then we also started to receive modeling data. And modeling data tells you what may happen, but it's not necessarily what is happening. It's think about it as a like the GFS model for hurricanes or for weather prediction. It tells you maybe what is the potential, but not necessarily what is happening. So as we start taking a look at these data points and we get additional information, we're sharing information throughout the entire weekend of where we're at. We have responders at the site. And early on, it was reported to us from the responders at the site that when Norfolk Southern arrived, that they kind of segregated off their operation. So there was a little bit of a challenge getting good information flow. Fast forward to the Sunday night, which would have been February 5th. At that point in time, we have, in fact, Director Moore and I were on the phone at about 8 o'clock. He had received an update. We were exchanging information. And shortly after that exchange of information, we knew that we were concerned about the 5 vinyl chloride cars, and they were down to about one. They were concerned significantly about one car. Other 4 were relatively stable. It's consistent with information we received from the county and Director Brewer and his staff. So at that point in time, they were concerned about one of the vinyl chloride cars. Shortly after that briefing, our watch center picks up a notification from East Palestine that says that they are really looking at that 1 mile evacuation because of a potential catastrophic failure. So I called Director Moore back, said, what are you tracking? Because what we just talked about doesn't seem like it's meshing with the report we just received. At that point in time, there was a reach out to the emergency response personnel on the site, and it took a while for us to be able to get that, but then it was that one vinyl chloride car they're really concerned about a potential catastrophic failure. The plan as it was related at that point in time was that if that car did not catastrophically fail, that they would consider a vent and burn operation, which is a tactic to be able to use on that one car about noon the following day. Fast forward from that, And we actually brought our staff in that morning at the Commonwealth Response Coordination Center. We were conducting training. Director Moore was there. We were exchanging information. We wanted to use it as a training opportunity for our staff to look at the modeling, look at the EPA dashboard that was stood up, take a look at all the data points and the air monitoring that was there. And we were actually in the middle of that when I was looped. I actually received a phone call from my colleague in Ohio. I had contacted her early on Saturday morning in the early morning hours, about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, get an update from her. And at that point in time, she says, listen, our governor is calling your governor and we need to talk. I said, okay. So I was looped into a conversation with Governor Shapiro and Governor DeWine at that point in time and at the incident command post. And there was a discussion regarding the evacuation and the vent and burn of 5 rail cars. And I think Director Brewer probably said it the best when he testified in Washington, is that was jaw-dropping because we had no previous indication that they were concerned about venting and burning all 5. That's a big change in tactics at that point in time. And then we realized during that conversation that we may not have been looking at the same modeling data because they were talking about significant downwind challenges in the Commonwealth. And we looked at the modeling we received that morning and something did not make sense. And we realized that there's a good possibility we're looking at 2 different maps or 2 different models. So we worked to be able to resolve that. At that point in time, we fully activate the Commonwealth Response Coordination Center, bring in additional staff. We want to make sure that we're supporting the county. We have to establish shelters, and we're waiting on that additional modeling that Ohio's actually CST, which is their civil support team, is sending to us. So we get that modeling, and then we realize it's much different than what we were looking at previously, and then we're trying to adjudicate that. So there's a follow-up phone call regarding that, of why that is so different than what the modeling that we received through the Interagency Modeling and Atmospheric Assessment Center, which is a federal enterprise, why that was so different. During that call, there's a discussion about the conversion of phosgene, and if we would have 5 vinyl chloride cars fail, that conversion was modeled at 70% of that product would convert to phosgene gas, which was usually covering the largest area in the modeling we were looking at. Now, again, we had air monitoring in the area that told us that there was no phosgene leaving the site at that point in time, but that was the concern. And on that phone conversation, there was a discussion regarding somebody that was there at the incident command post. We believe it was a technical specialist of some sort that was working in conjunction with Norfolk Southern, questioned the 70% conversion. So they went back through and took a look at that. They referenced a number of sources, and the data that they referenced said it's actually less than 1% actually will convert as opposed to the 70%. So that changes all the modeling. That changes everything that we're looking at. And we really want to have good products to inform any protective action decisions. So at that point in time, when we looked at that updated modeling and they ran it with that 1% conversion to phosgene, it put it back into really that mile area to be able to make sure that we evacuated. And at that point in time, there was a discussion of we wanted to make sure everybody was out of that area. We worked with the county, and actually they assigned either state police or local law enforcement to be able to go out and make sure everybody that was in that 1 mile ring within Beaver County was evacuated before we responded back to the incident command post to let them know that we have confirmation. And then the vent and burn occurred at about 1640 hours or so. They originally were shooting for noon, but we wanted to make it very clear that we wanted confirmation that we had people out of harm's way within that mile radius. And then that's what pushed the time frame back a little bit. But also on that first phone conversation, I don't want to lose this point, between Governor Shapiro and Governor DeWine, we asked, how do we go from 1 car the night before that we're concerned about to 5 cars that morning? And what other alternative courses of action were considered? And at that point in time, the individuals at the command post that were working on behalf of Norfolk Southern made it very clear that they had over 200, and this is a quote from the call, they had over 200 years worth of experience working this, and that was their recommendation. And they would not provide us any other alternative courses of action that were considered on behalf. We do have some data from the 1 or 2 days before that says they were considered hot tapping one of the cars or a series of the cars, which is a different procedure to either burn it off in smaller amounts or potentially transfer it. but we were trying to figure out why we went from 1 car to 5. And the way it was presented to us that morning is it was time sensitive, that any of the, all 5 cars could fail catastrophically at any point in time, and we had to make this decision now and execute this course of action.
So I guess the main concern was they were worried about one going and then the rest going, I guess, something very catastrophic.
And we were trying to figure out why there was a change in 12 hours or less from what we were briefed on. The information that we have that we were briefed on the night before would lead us to believe that at least 4 of those cars were stable. The fires were out sometimes, or mostly out on sometime during the day on Sunday.
Thank you, Randy. I appreciate that. We have the list of questions. Somebody have the folks?
We do. We're going to start with Chairman Kill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the acting secretaries. Right now is an extraordinarily busy time for you. I know you guys are getting ready for confirmations, for appropriations hearings, and all of that. I appreciate you spending the time to come out here to talk about this very important matter. As it relates to testing, I'm by no means an expert on testing, but I am learning throughout this process. And as it relates to air, water, and soil, my understanding of it is that there is no just basic test that picks up contamination. You're actually testing for particular chemical matter that is leaked into the ground. With what degree of certainty are we looking at here that what we are testing for is actually the threat that is in the ground, air, or water?
So there's a general test that there actually is that tests for a whole sort of portfolio of toxic chemicals, and we call that VOC testing, right? Volatile organic compounds. And there's a whole host of, how many, Brian? Hundreds? How many compounds are tested for?
I mean, we're looking at hundreds of individual chemicals as part of those standards.
So we have made sure that those hundreds of them is included the ones that were actually on this train, to make sure, we can talk about some of the testing around things like dioxin and other things like that, which are sort of ever present in the atmosphere at any given moment. But the testing is specific. There's another form of testing called SVOC testing, which is really around particulate matter, and that is what might come off during just a large fire, right? Like it's soot, it's smoke, it's the kind of damage that might occur and impact the respiratory issue around just a large kind of fire event with smoke, and that's about the plume and all of that. But the VOC testing will give you what you need in order to see the levels and the results. The certainty around that, I think, is a great conversation. I'm not an expert scientist either. I think it's about our toxicologists. It's about our scientists kind of telling you and relying with DOH on what the safe levels are. I want to make an important point around some of that, because I think, when you ask the question, Representative Marshall, around some of the health issues, I think Dr. Bogan has talked about this in the past. One of the important things for us to be sensitive to is that when you look at the standard testing, often those standards are really around a kind of a healthy industrial worker and somebody who's within a certain age range, and those are all things that we have to consider as government officials. So we're sensitive to the fact that if even though it may be below the typical standard for a acute exposure for a short-term event, if you've got a vulnerable situation where you've got either a respiratory issue, whether it's COPD or asthma or something like that, you can be more sensitive than sort of the average general citizen, and should be thoughtful around all of that. And you might have an impact there where it wouldn't be a significant impact for the population. And doctor, I don't want to practice medicine, so correct me, please, if I'm misstating any of that. But I think that answers your question, I hope.
Thank you. Representative Venkat?
So thank you to all of you for your great explanations to this point. One of the concerns I have is that we are going to reach the point of not having scientific certainty about the relationship between this exposure and what happens to this community. And it's very clear with any type of disastrous event like this was, there's an impact just from being in a disaster for the individual and the community. So my question is, we're going to get to the point where scientific attribution is going to be limited, but there are going to be health effects in this community just from being involved in a disaster. What is the thought process of the administration on how to address that and to recognize that the duration of need for this community is going to go well beyond the testing of soil, air, and water just from having been involved in a traumatic event like this?
I agree with you 100%. The worry and the angst that people are experiencing as a result of this is really, it's hard, and it lasts a long time. And, we're just coming off 3 years of COVID, where people experienced that sort of angst for a long period of time, and we're still having to address the behavioral health concerns raised by COVID. So it's not any different. We have a shortage of behavioral health services across the United States and in our own communities here. So we are sort of thinking about how do you build the pipeline of behavioral health support? How do we provide that through existing organizations, through our schools, through our aging populations? So this is a new event, but it's not very different. As you said, when you have emergencies, it creates angst and worry in people. And so I think we just need to be cognizant. One of the things that I think has been done really well here is we have brought together local behavioral health services, and hopefully those folks will continue to provide and link people to care. There's been lots of people stopping at the spiritual help desk to get support through clergy. And so I think small communities that have good support and neighborly help is another way. So really supporting one another and listening and being kind and supportive is really important. I think as we discover the need, we'll try to respond. But really there is a need for behavioral health support ongoing. And it's not just behavioral health support, it's also physical health needs, because as we know, behavioral health does lead and contribute to heart disease and stroke risk and other things. So I think we're here to listen and to have people tell us what those needs are, and we're going to try to do our best to provide the services that people need, but open to hearing that.
And I can actually add to that a little bit. So I know that our Department of Human Services under Acting Secretary Arkush has been involved in conversations regarding some availability of federal funding to be able to provide a maybe longer-term behavioral health support for the community here. I know that they've engaged in conversations, I believe, with the county behavioral health staff as well. So those conversations are ongoing, and they'd be able to utilize and leverage federal funding to be able to provide those services if available.
Yeah, I would just add, and for my colleagues who are here locally, that this is going to require a significant investment, not just in the behavioral health realm, but also in the physical health realm and in the community health realm. And so thinking about this beyond just the attribution of what's going on with these particular exposures is going to take a much longer period of time that we need to keep a focus on.
Representative Rigby.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, panel. Mine's going to focus more on our first responders and their potential direct exposure. I noticed a month after the incident, the surveys were completed by at least 87 of those individuals, with 80 some saying they had the ear, nose, and throat, or the throat nose. What are the plans long term? And are we getting to all of our first responders? I know, there's a lot of those guys that just swallow their pride, and it's not going to happen to me. And I'm just wondering what the long term is. Do we do the surveys and put them away? I was looking at some of the questions. Are we looking at pre-existing conditions for some of our first responders that may have then been exposed? And is it something, maybe not now, but a year from now or 2 years from now, that we're going to see? I mean, how long do we keep this open, and how do you continue to monitor that?
Thank you. The ACE survey there's a separate survey for the first responders, as you said. And the plan is that we will analyze the data from those surveys, and based on those data, talk to the folks at the CDC and ATSDR and to really develop those next steps. So I don't have the next steps ready for you today. That is the point of collecting those data and really figuring out what to do next, not to just let it sit on the shelf.
Is it safe to assume that we're going to continue to monitor this and we'll follow up to make sure that it doesn't come back to bite us 2 years from now?
That is our plan as we discuss with sort of our federal partners what we should be doing next. Is it more surveying? Is it, right now we're doing surveys, we're not doing health assessments, so we're not checking people's physical exams and blood work, we're really just asking people questions. So the question is, what do you do next? Do you do more surveys? Does this call for more of health assessment? And that we don't have the answers to at this point, but that is the plan, is to make that decision making based on the surveys we get.
Thank you very much.
Representative Otten.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you to all of the secretaries who've joined us today. I have one comment and I have a question. Going back to Representative Venkat's comments, one of the areas that I think we often think of as an afterthought 20, 30 years down the line is maternal and infant health when it comes to exposure to chemicals and pollution. And I think that it's really important that in addition to behavioral health, real-time health issues, that we're looking at infant mortality, maternal mortality, and also next gen. So what's going to happen to the young women who can give birth in the future who've been exposed, and how might that impact their fertility and their outcomes in the future? And so 2 years down the road, yes, but also 25 years down the road, I think is a really important thing we should be thinking about now, because as a parent to a child who was born with a spontaneous birth defect that affects his entire life, as an aunt to a child who also was born with a condition that affects his whole life, this is something that could still be impacting families who live here 50 years from now. And we need to hold Norfolk Southern accountable for taking care of those families and their future. My question, and for Chairman Marshall and Chairman Matsey, I have a bill in your committee, the Early Detection and Warning Fund bill, that my community is impacted by transportation of hazardous materials via pipelines through high consequence communities. We have a hazardous liquids pipeline that goes 50 feet from our backyard. And my bill was designed to address the issue that we're facing right now, where we have private companies that withhold information during emergency events. That is critical information that we should have in advance versus on the back end in real time. My bill would create a assessment formula that would look at volatility, consequence in terms of human life and property, pressure, diameter of pipes or transportation material or transportation methods to determine an impact fee that would not be in the hands of a private corporation but would be in the hands of the government, to provide financial support in situations like this. We currently have a primarily volunteer-based emergency management, especially in rural communities, response system in Pennsylvania. We have firefighters who work full-time jobs who, have to rush out in a situation like this. It's not, some of our larger cities like Philadelphia have a full-time staffed fire department that can respond in situations like this, but in places like Western Pennsylvania, we rely primarily on volunteers. Our volunteer fire companies are highly stressed, financially distressed. Our emergency services, our healthcare systems, our ambulance companies. And so without holding corporations accountable on the front end to plan for disasters, we are putting our people and our communities at risk of not having the resources we need to respond in an emergency. And so I guess my question would be, if you could do this over again, what kinds of information do you feel that we should have on the front end? Obviously, we may not know the chemical that's in the train, but if we know modeling and we know impact radius and we know volatility measures, we can assess the impact in the case that emergencies may happen. And that goes for any transportation of hazardous materials, whether that's through trains, trucks, or pipelines. So I would love to have your thoughts on that.
Okay, thank you very much for that question. So there's a lot to unpack there, but ultimately, I think a lot of this comes back to pre-planning. So that's what you're talking about, is the ability to be able to do that. And I think, in a perfect world, that makes great sense, and we do that to a certain degree. I think that the challenge is the ability for the local, as you indicated, volunteer fire service, volunteer EMS service, emergency management, to be able to provide that level of pre-planning. So I think it makes perfect sense from my perspective. It is, what do they do with the information once they receive it? Most of the time, the information that we receive is kind of generalities. What we tell people is, if there is a train, a set of tracks that goes through your jurisdiction, you might as well plan on some level of hazardous materials being involved in that train. What it actually happens to be, you may not know until you're dispatched to that incident, and there's ways to be able to gain that information. But I think a lot of this goes back to pre-planning and looking at, what are the most plausible scenarios. We do this in Homeland Security. We do this in a lot of other things that we do with threat and hazard identification and risk analysis. So our regional task forces are involved in that. But you're talking about taking it to a much smaller level, take a look at community impacts. And again, I think it makes perfect sense to be able to do that. There are some applications out there to be able to assist. The rail industry has Ask Rail. That'll give you the information based on the consist, or give you the consist information. You need a tank car number to be able to put in there when you respond to an incident. So we've actually proactively pushed that back out. So we've surveyed our counties to make sure that we have good penetration of that. A lot of local responders may not know that that is available. It is a vetted community. They actually have to go in and apply, and then they will go through the process that verification that they are actually attached to an emergency services organization. Then they will have access to that. And there are a number of tools within that. That was developed by the rail industry. There are limitations from a federal law perspective of what they can provide us in this situation based on the rail. This incident was not a high hazard flammable train. It did not actually trigger that criteria. A high hazard flammable train is 20 cars in a row of a class 3 flammable liquid, or any 35 on an entire train. So this train itself did not meet that classification. However, we know that it was extremely hazardous with the 5 cars of vinyl chloride, the butyl acrylate, and everything else that was involved with that. So, I think to the right jurisdictions, that information makes sense, but they have to have the bandwidth to be able to assess the impacts and plan for it. And I think the key is, how do we give them that bandwidth to be able to do that and utilize that information to make it most effective for them.
Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate everyone's response and your department's response to this, trying to coordinate between multiple states. Kind of building a little bit off of, apparently, as you had mentioned, it was Norfolk Southern's decision to go from 1 car to suddenly all of them. If that would have been in Pennsylvania, did they make that call, or can you touch on that?
Thank you, Representative Nelson, for that question. And the reason we chuckle is that has been a subject of conversation. So the rail companies are provided broad latitude. There are federal laws that permit them what they can do. The challenge is that that may have been the best of all the bad options for them. But not being in the command post, not being part and privy to the communication that occurred at the command post, it's hard to tell whether that was that was the only option that they could consider in this type of situation. So, when it comes down to it, within the right of way of the rail, I think they have liberty to be able to do what they need to do or what they feel they need to do. The challenge is there really needs to be unified command with all the municipalities that are impacted. And I've heard the CEO talk that they believe they were in unified command at that point in time. However, when we're looking at a potential downwind impact and evacuating personnel in Beaver County, there are people from the state of Pennsylvania that have a seat at that table when it comes to unified command and how that decision is being made. The timing of that decision, there are, when you take a look at large complex incidents, something like this, if that was the only option that was presented, we would take a look at timing. We would look at when are the best weather conditions to be able to execute that operation. We knew that evening we were coming into a thermal inversion, which is not, Hazmat 101 says that, in the evening, air currents stabilize out, the contaminants are transported a lot further. That's why in the emergency response guidebook, your night downwind evacuation is much larger and much further out. So they're
Nope. I appreciate all that information, and kind of to Chairman Matzie's point at the beginning, the opportunity of who has that authority moving forward, maybe something that the legislature can take a look at, because that larger burn then resulted in a much larger exposure to the residents, which takes us, Mr. Negrin, in your testimony, you had said that we were based off of short-term exposure limits, that's a 15-minute exposure, like with OSHA or NIOSH, versus like a 8-hour exposure. So with vinyl chloride, that switches from 5 parts per million to 1. With benzene, I think there were 2 cars of benzene there, 5 parts per million in 1. As we move forward, what are the levels? Because we're actually dealing with chronic exposures, which is much bigger. So what will the thresholds be?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think, and I want to make it clear, what we were told and what we know for a fact. There weren't 2 cars of benzene. There were cars that had benzene in them that were empty, but clearly had some benzene substance remnants from when residual stuff in it. So fortunately for us, I think there weren't 2 full benzene cars. I think that could have created a significantly bigger risk. When I say short term, I think there's the testing and federal definition, and then there's the sort of DEP and kind of how we're thinking about this, and we're really thinking about it in terms of the acute exposure within those first couple days, especially when it's in the air and it dissipates so quickly, right? So we're talking about the risks around the respiratory stuff is really, really gone within the first 4 or 5 days, especially if you're not on site. The conversation around and your question around those first responders and the people who were on site is very, very different, right? Those are acute, short-term exposures that you're going to have to look at, not just in terms of immediate symptoms, but long-term symptoms with a lot of those folks. For the majority of the citizens in Darlington and elsewhere, as you go out in those miles, the short-term exposure that I'm thinking about in my mind is the plume, right? And what happened with the wind in those days immediately after the event, and what kind of their exposure they had during that time period. So we've got readings for that show that they're below dangerous levels, and that's important.
That's helpful. It just takes me to Dr. Bergen's.
Yeah.
With the health surveys. Is there an opportunity for like some quantitative medical testing for some of those people that are exhibiting symptoms similar to the vinyl chloride, like that, just similar to the great feeling our farmers are going to have when their soil tests come back and it says this is what is here? Is there an opportunity for the residents to get a similar?
I think you're asking, is there a benefit to testing biological samples at this point of humans? I think the thought is right now we should be testing soil and water and not humans, because we don't, a lot of the data for testing humans, there's acute exposure when the time of the fire and the release. But a lot of those are very acute, and then there's really nothing necessarily to measure in the human unless they're sick and having symptoms. So for instance, the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey, which is a national survey that's done across the country, does look for some chemicals in people through biological samples, blood, urine, and again, for many people, there are some chemicals in our bodies that are not natural to the human body. And so we have some data from NHANES that shows the proportion of populations, and there's variability from one community to the other, literally large geographic areas. It's not small areas. We're talking about big parts of the country. So the Northeast may have slightly higher levels of one versus another. There's no clinical correlation, so we don't know if you measure this particular compound in human blood or urine, what does that tell you about the health risks? So we don't have that data. I know people would like us to have that data, but we don't. And so it's really hard to know if you do that test, what does it mean for someone? And how would you interpret it, and how would it change the medical management that you would provide to them? And at this point, we aren't recommending those kinds of tests unless people have specific symptoms, because we, again, don't have that clinical correlation to know how to respond and what to do with that.
Thank you. Representative Piscitano?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank the panel. I'll be brief here, but I have a couple short questions that I'm hoping the panel can answer. How much info today are we relying on Norfolk Southern to provide us feedback on? Is it 0% at this point? We're independently, the state or Ohio or whoever, the EPA is independently verifying everything we're getting from Norfolk Southern?
Yeah, look, I mean, I don't want to, I'm going to handle that question because this is a source of some angst for me. When you look at the sheer number of derailments that occur, I've seen his numbers as high as 140 annually for Norfolk Southern. When you look at 1,700 of them happening across the country with the rail industry, it's clear to me that a derailment is a part of their business model. They're used to, I think there's been 4 derailments since this one occurred throughout the country. I don't know about you, but that's a problem for me.
Me too.
And when I learned that they immediately signed on a contractor and immediately started testing and doing those things, it was clear to me that they use a contractor that they use everywhere, who makes a lot of money working for Norfolk Southern, who then sends it to a lab that does a lot of work for Norfolk Southern, which is why we did independent testing for the first time ever and sent it to our lab because it was incredibly important. So to answer your question, 0% from our DEP is considering, we're looking at their results because we think we should. It's split monitoring is a best practice, and it allows you to compare results. So we're not ignoring them. I'm not going to say that we're not looking at them, but in terms of whether I'm going to make a decision on what a safe level is or not, that's our testing and our folks.
And I appreciate that. I think that's the right response from all state agencies at this point, that we should trust but verify everything that's coming out of Norfolk Southern's camp. And then as just a follow-up with that, as the state legislators up here, are they cooperating with all of the state agencies at this point? Are there any pain points that we need to be aware of with dealing with this?
I don't want to say pain points. I think an interesting question has arisen in the last couple of weeks relative to potential farm losses, right? So we're predicating, the ability to go back into the fields in a couple of weeks and plant and all on a clean bill of health, right? We're expecting that livestock, as they are on the landscape today, can be sold and enter the food system. I think there's an open question about all of that until we have, all of the results in this, the air, water, and soil analysis. So I just raised the point that no one has talked about Norfolk Southern's, resources being available to potentially cover agricultural losses. And I think that's something that we are pursuing, by the way. We've asked that question, but to, members of the House, it's something we need to think about. If these farms cannot sell what is here, cannot market their product, as I've been reminded by Cliff and the Farm Bureau, the whole the life changes here. And whether that is a short-term or longer-term impact, I think is something we certainly ought to expect Norfolk Southern to be engaged with us on and covering those potential losses. But in the event it doesn't, what could could happen and be available, what could be available from the House and Senate to assist.
Thank you.
Secretary Negrin, did you say 1,400 of the 1,700 derailments are all Norfolk Southern?
No, 140 a year, roughly. I've seen different numbers from 130 to 140 just for Norfolk Southern.
Okay.
The entire rail industry is nearly 2,000 overall.
Okay. All right.
Yep.
Representative DeVanzo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to panel. Over the last probably 2 weeks, I've been across the state twice, and I'm noticing of a lot of little shipping containers on train cars, gray with a hazardous placard, 1333 on them. When you look at it, it's flammable, and it says it could possibly be vinyl, in these containers. Do we know where to clean up any soil? Do we know where they're going?
And Representative, are you talking specifically from the East Palestine?
Yeah.
incident?
From any cleanup effort, any soil that was left over, anything that leaked onto the soil's got to be cleaned up. Any liquid, do we know about where it's going?
So EPA does know, and EPA is involved in that. So obviously there's an EPA order that is directing Norfolk Southern what to do at this point in time. And I know that that has been discussion in the Unified Coordination Group meetings and also the Command and General Staff meetings that they're having at the larger level. And I know that they are working that out to be able to assure that these facilities are equipped and permitted to be able to handle any of the recovery that's associated with this. To the best of my knowledge, none of those facilities are in Pennsylvania right now.
Okay. I have an environmental landfill in my district, really why I was asking, but also, if Norfolk Southern, burned these train cars to protect their checkbook, right? I just want to make sure that we as administration hold them fully accountable, because if we're going to put this contaminated soil 5 or 6 different landfills across the state, these municipalities need to be held accountable, or I guess they need to be made whole of that. So, just something I'll be following up on. So thank you.
Thank you. Representative Mirsky.
Thank you, Chairman Bizzaro, and thank you to the panel. This isn't a question, but more of a comment and coordination within the administration. As a member of the Game and Fisheries Committee, we know that animals don't follow political borders. They don't know the difference between Ohio and Pennsylvania. They don't follow orders to evacuate a 1 mile area, and they don't follow orders, don't drink this water. And so I just encourage you, many folks in Western Pennsylvania, we don't hunt for sport, we hunt to eat. And so to coordinate with the Pennsylvania Game Commission, with all of your information, all of your data, so that the hunters and anglers in this room and across Western Pennsylvania can be confident that the food that they're consuming, their wild game, small game, large game, is safe to eat. I think that's very important because these animals, like I said, they're drinking the water, they're inhaling the air, and they didn't follow any orders, and so and they don't know the borders, so they're coming from Ohio across the PA line, and I just want to make sure our hunters are safe.
Representative Gatos.
Thank you, Chairman Kale, Matsy, Marshall, and Bizzaro. And thank you to the state agencies who are here. I appreciate your story of how you coordinated, and that's really impressive that the communication seems to have been very strong to solve the problems for our community, so thank you. I represent a district that has thousands or hundreds of miles of, lots of miles of railroad track going through almost 9 communities. So we have Leetsdale, Swickley, Edgeworth, Osborne, Glenfield, Hayesville, Moon, and Coriopolis. And when we talked a little bit earlier about the anxiety of the communities when the trains go through, we're very vigilant on that, and our communities are very concerned. We are supportive of the communities up here because we also have trains that go through our districts. And Norfolk Southern has how many thousands of miles going through the entire state of Pennsylvania, and of course many who are here today representing those districts. What has been and this is going forward, what in the future have the departments done for enforcement? As we've seen through our communities, a lot of times speed, they're going through the communities. A couple of our communities have actually reported that when the trains stop, I guess they're only supposed to stop for a certain period of time. We recognize that it's important that they stop and check their cars, but oftentimes we've had some communities that are trapped behind these railroad tracks because there's only one entrance in and out, and particularly those of us who have districts along the riverfront. And so what kind of enforcement going forward, what is the relationship that you have with Norfolk Southern? Because I'm kind of disappointed that Norfolk Southern isn't here today, but what kind of stuff going forward are you working with Norfolk Southern?
I can probably take that question from our perspective. So we work hand in hand. As I discussed earlier, there is an incident reporting system. We work with the counties, and this occurs. So if they have a crossing that is blocked for an extended period of time, a lot of times the counties will notify us because that impacts the potential for emergency services response. And then part of that notification, PUC will receive that as well. So I'm not sure of the regulatory authority of the Pennsylvania or the Public Utility Commission, but my understanding is we also have our notification networks go rather broad. So there are other folks that are notified of those types of things. So if it is reported to us, it just doesn't stay within our agency. It goes also outside of our agency to the other potential regulators. So they have awareness of a lot of these things. And that's occurring now and has occurred.
Is there any kind of training for our municipalities that, to have the communication to refresh? Because obviously a lot of the folks who are elected in our local municipalities change frequently. Is there something that our municipalities can participate in that would help them with the response?
Sure, we can definitely take a look at that. We work through our network of emergency managers. So we work at the county, and then the county conducts usually the training for the municipal emergency management coordinators. But they also talk about what are reportable requirements. So we can definitely take that back and really reinforce what is a reportable requirement that we want to have come to us, and then we can get it to the larger audience.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Representative Salisbury, and then our final question back to Chairman Marshall.
Thank you. I'm a brand new state representative, so I have less than a month in this office, but I have 5 years in borough government. And my district has 12 different small communities ranging from 450 people up to about 13,000 people. I have dealt with Norfolk Southern in my capacity as borough council president, and I was told in no uncertain terms by multiple different Pennsylvania departments. I've heard from DCED, from PUC, from PennDOT, that we've given away our power to do anything about these railroads. And when it was mentioned earlier that the quote from Norfolk Southern was, "We have over 200 years of experience," I was told we gave away our rights 200 years ago, actually was the quote that I was told in trying to deal with Norfolk Southern from a local government perspective. I was very struck and shocked and a little bit horrified earlier when it was mentioned that we have Department of Environmental Protection, we have emergency management, we have all of these different layers of things working together, focusing on statistical models, et cetera. But ultimately, it sounds as if the decision about what to do was just made by Norfolk Southern. And have we just given away our rights to do anything about these railroads that go through our communities? My law office, where I'm a sole practitioner, is across the street from a Norfolk Southern train track. If we have a derailment, I'll die that moment. So I'm very concerned that we have given away our power to do anything about these derailments. Is there anything that local government can do? Is there anything that we as state government can do to take back some of that power? What is the command structure such that it was just allowed to a decision to burn 5 cars worth of very terrifying materials to the average person? I'm not a scientist, but these things are terrifying to the average person. what kind of command structure is there, and what can we put in place, if anything, as legislators to take back some of that power so that you don't have very educated, smart people looking at statistical models, but ultimately saying, okay, Norfolk Southern, if you want to burn your train cars full of stuff, I guess it's up to you.
Thank you for that question. And as I indicated, there is a legal argument of what legally that they can do under the federal laws. And I think that is an ongoing discussion of what is our ability. Obviously, when we're handling a large incident like this that is extremely complex, you never want to get to the point where you have to force one side versus the other side from a legal perspective and legal grounds. You want to be able to mutually come to a decision that makes sense for the local community, but also makes sense for what we're trying to accomplish. And I think that should be everybody's goal. I think the concern is the decision being made based on a business practice? And that is the concern. The other thing that I will tell you from years of experience of doing this is you allow technical specialists to inform your decision. As an experienced incident manager, you do not allow technical specialists to make your decision on your behalf. And these are all the complexities that you run into when you run into situations like this. So I think there's obviously things that can be done from the legal side to make sure that this does not happen again. And if push comes to shove, that they just can't take the action that they deem necessary to be able to do it. But ultimately, it comes down to implementation of unified command, understanding that everybody has the same information. You're acting in accordance with all of the safety parameters for the community that you're dealing with and everything else. You never want to get, as an incident manager, I never want to get into a legal discussion on pushing the envelope of legally they can do this. I want to make sure that we have a mutual understanding and that we can support everybody's objectives by the course of action that is being presented. But I think that warrants further exploration as far as what legally, what legal grounds we have to stand on to be able to push back for something like that.
Chairman Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had a question for Secretary Redding that was previously answered on farmers being able to take their product to market. And again, we'll continue to talk with you and with President Wallace about that. And I just have two closing comments for this halftime as we get ready to change the panel. First off, really to the audience here virtually, both virtually and present, your safety is paramount to Darlington Township, to Beaver County, and to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and by every member of this diverse group we have here. And we all have different fields of expertise. And I just wanted to mention one of those, Representative Venkat is an emergency department physician, so we especially appreciate his talent here today. And I wanted to thank, again, Governor Shapiro. When he came to Beaver County and met with the delegation, we laid out what was vital to us. And one of those was we need DEP to come in and test private wells. And we all appreciate that you came in and made that extraordinary measure to do that. I want to thank DEP and the governor for that. It's essential. I mean, water, air, soil, it's the basis of life here. These questions are essential to residents of the Commonwealth, and we appreciate you being here. So thank you to this panel, and thank you to the members, and then we will bring in the local and county governments now.
Thank you. Well, Rob's still in the bathroom. We've got a couple members. Yeah, just might like to.
He can come in.
All right, if everyone could take their seats, we're going to be starting in a minute.
Members and guests, if we could please take our seats so we could resume. While we're settling in, I wanted to mention that Nate is here from Senator Vogel's office. Thank you. There's representation from Senator Fetterman's office. And I want to recognize also that I'm not sure if Senator Casey's staff made it here or not yet, but their office has been instrumental in helping Darlington Township and the Commonwealth at large. And Senator Casey also has introduced new legislation on this topic. So this segment is our local impact testifiers. We have County Commissioner Dan Camp. He's going to recognize the other county commissioners here, and Township Supervisor Mike Carrion, who will recognize his supervisors and I believe his police that are here as well. So, Mike, you want to go ahead and start off?
Yeah, Mike Carrion, Chairman of the Board, Darlington Township. Colleagues, Tom Blinkowitz, Greg Hewlett, and Chief Beakey is here, and I think Chris just left on a fire call.
Thank you, and if you could proceed with your comments.
Thanks. So I'm here on two parts, chairman of the board and also as a local ag producer. I think my written statement kind of covers the township end of it, the impacts and concerns. So briefly, I'd like to talk about the ag impact. We run a pretty sizable operation for Darlington Township. It's about 400 acres, 4 generations. I've done it with my father-in-law, my son. Put a pretty big emphasis on the land. We've done stuff with NRCS, riparian buffers. We rotate our cows every day so they're not beating the land up, erosion, stuff like that. That's pretty important to our customer base. We kind of get the customers that they want non-GMO, they want grass-fed, they want clean beef. And since the derailment happened, I've had quite a few phone calls come in, and they trust me as a producer. I'm giving them the information that I have. Obviously, this is all new to me too, so I can only relay what I'm being told. But there's also others. I think one story in particular is worth noting. Last summer, we had a doctor. He called, and he'd heard about the operation that we ran and wanted to come down and check it out. He showed up, little blue minivan one summer day, and out gets his wife and a couple kids. They just spent about an hour going around with us, checking the operation out, how we did things, and they're really in awe. And they decided that was the type of operation that they wanted to get their beef from. It was in line with their values. So we picked out a cow for them, and they even came back another time, keep an eye on the cow, see how it was going. So you fast forward into last November, we take the cow, it's butchered, and they call back and they're ecstatic. They want to be customers for life. And we have a pretty big waiting list, so he wanted to make sure he was on the list for 2023, and he said, put me down every year. And I told my wife when that derailment happened, I said, I expect a phone call. Well, February 28th, the phone call came, canceled the order for this year. And that story is not unique. I've talked to other producers in the area, same thing. Fortunately for me, he canceled an order for this coming October. So I have time to get more information, work around it, and probably, replace that order. I've talked to neighboring guys in the same situation, and their animals are set to go to butcher now. So if you can think of that, you have all the money invested up until that point of taking that animal to butcher, and when that customer cancels, your expense is ongoing. And through COVID, getting an appointment at a butcher shop is a big deal. A lot of times you've got 2 years out, you have to make these appointments. So guys are losing that appointment. They have an animal. Their only option then is to go to a sale barn, and that's bottom dollar market. You won't even recoup your expenses. I've heard other guys, they have concerns over, so when you store your grain on a farm, the big galvanized bins, there's fans that run on those that draw air in, to keep, certain temperatures. And there's concerns over the air that got pulled in that night. Is the corn good? Is it not good? Can we feed it to our animals? Can we ship it to market? Guys with calves would be the same thing. Can we ship our calves onto the feeder market, or are guys not going to want them? Or will guys want them but want to buy them at a discount? These are all real questions, real concerns. We don't have the answers for it. Hopefully we can kind of set that back, the perception, because this ag economics, it's really emotionally driven, and everybody questioning it and going off of fear right now without real hard facts to back what we're saying, it's going to be hard on the market. I just think I'd like to see us get the testing done and keep pushing all the positive results that we get back. Educate the public. We really got to push that. And I think Norfolk Southern really needs to step up. I mean, they put a black eye on the community, and to date, for Pennsylvania, they're doing nothing, you might as well say. And for the ag producers, we're going to eat all those costs. The trains are still coming through town, but we're going to have to eat our cost. That's all I got on that.
Thank you, Mike. Those are the same questions I asked Secretary Redding, and I'm glad that Mark Kritz is here from Department of Ag. He's been answering those, taking those questions, and we do need answers. We do need to make sure that if we do have positive results, as you said, that the public needs to know that, because perception is driving your market, and we realize that. Chairman Dan Camp, Beaver County Board of Commissioners, thank you for being here today, but thank you also for being on scene at the incident in East Palestine, and throughout this last 38 days have been here with Beaver Countyans, either in person or on the radio or everywhere. So I appreciate that, and please introduce your co-chairs
Absolutely.
and proceed.
Today, I have the honor of Commissioner Tony Amadeo and Commissioner Jack Manning to my left, your right, with me here today. I am just the elected person to be speaking. They have played just as pivotal of a role as I have, or anyone in the Beaver County community, to handle this situation. Chairman Bizzaro, Chairman Kale, Chairman Matsey, Chairman Marshall, honorable members of each respected policy committee, thank you. Thank you for inviting me to testify on behalf of Beaver County and our residents who were upended from their lives and their daily routines due to what appears to be a heedless action from Norfolk Southern. As I mentioned, I'm joined by my fellow colleagues, Commissioner Amadeo and Commissioner Manning. Please accept the written testimony that was submitted on behalf of the Board of Commissioners from Eric Brewer. That testimony is giving a more detailed response. Eric is our Director of Emergency Services and was on response 24/7 in East Palestine, Ohio. For the residents who are joining with us today, most of you will be a little repetitive because our House of Representatives needs to hear exactly what the Pennsylvania Senate was told a few weeks back. In my 8 years as county commissioner, we have worked closely with many different agencies across the Commonwealth while we had our fair share of emergency events here in Beaver County. In 2018, we experienced a natural gas line explosion that resulted in approximately 25 houses being evacuated and a $30 million fine from the DEP to the pipeline owner. In 2019, we experienced a chemical fire in which a 5-mile area of the county was under a shelter in place, and a subsequent $3 million fine was filed by the DEP for cleanup. In 2020, along with the rest of the world in the trying times with the COVID-19 pandemic, unfortunately, here we are again discussing another emergency event affecting the residents of Beaver County, with that being the train derailment. Literally, if you don't know, it's a stone's throw away from the border in East Palestine, Ohio, that has affected our communities and will affect them for years to come. On February 3rd, 2023, Director Brewer notified myself and my colleagues, Commissioner Tony Amadeo and Commissioner Jack Manning, that Beaver County is responding to a train derailment in East Palestine, Ohio, which borders Darlington Township. Residents in Darlington Township and the rest of Beaver County went to sleep both Saturday and Sunday nights, assuming that the effects of this derailment were under control and the reality of the situation was becoming more volatile. The morning of February 6th, Monday after the derailment, the commissioners and I arrived at the command headquarters to meet Eric Brewer and his staff. It was at that time we were advised, as you heard, by Norfolk Southern and their contractors, there needed to be a controlled release and burn of the rail cars carrying chemicals that could explode and cause more serious damage. Governor DeWine was on site and on the phone the entire time, making these decisions and questioning Norfolk Southern with Governor Shapiro. As we had representatives at the command center with us from the PA DEP, U.S. EPA Region 3, PEMA, and the Pennsylvania State Police, along with various agencies from Ohio. Initially, as you heard earlier, the message from Norfolk Southern that it would be one rail car. But then that number was increased to 5 rail cars, being part of the controlled explosion. No information was conveyed from the railroad that I am aware of as to any alternate options other than this controlled release and burn. Couldn't be more proud of the job Beaver County and their first responders did by assisting through mutual aid through our Ohio neighbors, and also notifying our residents in Darlington and throughout Beaver County of the ongoing situation. 18 Beaver County fire departments responded to the crash scene along with Beaver County's hazmat team. During this controlled release and burn, a 1-mile area of Darlington Township had to be evacuated, along with numerous roads closed and the affecting families and businesses throughout the township. Our Emergency Services Director, Eric Brewer, and his Deputy Director, Kevin Whipple, were on scene, as I said, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, throughout that whole week. They and their staff have fielded hundreds of calls and have done an outstanding job navigating this county through another emergency. While none of us in this area will forget anytime soon the events that took place on February 3rd and the subsequent days, as we continue to distance ourselves from the actual events, we must not forget about those residents in Darlington Township and throughout the rest of our great county who will have lingering effects for this potential and considerable time moving forward. The emergency may be over, but the effects of Beaver County will remain for a long time. And in my last testimony, we made it very clear we need to call on our friends in Harrisburg to hold Norfolk Southern responsible for their actions. Last month, I visited a home in Darlington Township with Governor Shapiro and his team. They had the couple had a 1-year-old who just celebrated her birthday. As many of you heard today, they expressed the same concerns that many others have. What is safe and what isn't? Is their land okay to continue to lease and crop growers? Are the livestock safe in this area? Will the agricultural produce in this area be okay to harvest? Is their water and their wells safe to drink? And is the creek on the backside of their property safe to go in? Is the air safe to breathe? Last month, we told the Senate we must offer baseline testing for those who have well water and provide to test soil samples for the agriculture community. We must do these services for our residents, not only in the evacuation zone, but the areas directly outside of that 1-mile radius. While Governor Shapiro and his administration have made great strides in securing multiple buckets of money from Norfolk Southern, the Board of Commissioners last week announced that we will be looking and providing testing for those residents who may not qualify inside their mile radius. We must reimburse our business community who felt the effects of the road closures throughout the area. And tomorrow, the Board of Commissioners, Darlington Township representatives, and Lawrence County representatives will meet again with Norfolk Southern and discuss the impacts of this train derailment of our business communities and discuss how we can refund them. Our fire departments that responded to the scene have equipment that is contaminated. We must ensure that this is replaced immediately, as not having equipment jeopardizes the safety of those firefighters along with the community they serve. I believe our state officials need to continue to ensure Norfolk Southern offers assistance in all these areas in an attempt to rectify the problems they have created for our community. While there has been $5 million for replaced and contaminated and damaged equipment, we must make sure we act quickly so those communities are able to serve by their heroic first responders. Beaver County's officials work closely throughout the entire event and will continue to work with the PADP, PEMA, U.S. EPA Region 3, and Governor Shapiro and his administration to see this process through. In closing, I want to leave you with one thing. I want to make something very clear. Again, but I think it's important that this policy committee listens to Representative Vinkit when we are going to need long-term investments. And before you leave here, please look at the residents sitting behind me and don't forget about them, because Beaver County was just as affected as anyone in East Palestine, Ohio, and we need to make sure that we as a state hold Norfolk Southern accountable. Thank you.
Thank you. Chairman Marshall?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Commissioner. I mean, we welcome the help that you've offered today and have offered up until this time, and we appreciate that. As you say, you want to go to Harrisburg to hold Norfolk Southern accountable, as do we. A great deal of that responsibility is with the federal government. But I will say, Chairman Matzey and I chair Consumer Protection, Technology, and Utilities Committee, and we intend to run railroad legislation through our committee. Whether or not it directly impacts them, we believe it will, and we're committed to making them accountable for the concerns that you've brought up and the residents have brought up. So thank you, Chairman Camp, and thank you, Chairman Karen and Chairman Kale or Bizarre, if you have questions.
Chairman Matzey?
Thank you. Thank you both for your testimony, and Mike, thank you for your hospitality for the policy committee here today. I think it was interesting in the budget address last week, the governor talked about the agreement that came into effect with Norfolk Southern, and Commissioner Camp, you were there on behalf of the county, recognized the important thing that was said that day was something we all discussed when we talked privately with the governor, holding them accountable. And he was very specific with his words. It's a floor, not a ceiling. I think it's imperative, and it's really up to us to continue, the residents in this room, the policymakers that are sitting around the desk, yourself locally, to continue speaking up, speaking loud, and ensuring that this message is heard, not just locally, but across the nation. For the residents' benefit and for my colleagues, we have a superstructure in Beaver County that is owned by the Beaver County Board of Commissioners. Unfortunately, they own this massive superstructure that provides water to my community, but it's the Amber-Jaliquipa Bridge. It's almost 100 years old this year. The fights we have to do with the railroad to get that bridge inspected are insanity. The railroad owns more real estate than McDonald's. And for more than 100 years, the railroad has had carte blanche on policy. I am so damn proud that we have this bipartisan policy committee here today talking about regulatory control of the rail industry. That's a big deal. The end route for that train was Conway Yards in my district. Conway Yards at one time the largest switching station in the world. Commerce went through Beaver County and still does. It's still one of the largest. So the rail industry is still very important to our economy here in southwestern Pennsylvania. We don't forget that, and we still recognize it's a safe way when it is done properly. So we need to hold them accountable to ensure that the trains are safe, that the employees that are working there are working in a safe environment. So I think as we continue to have this dialogue and this conversation, it is incumbent upon us, and there are several members of our committee that are on this panel here today, and we're gonna continue this dialogue. We've been researching legislation. Ohio quickly ran some bills a week or so ago. There's a couple of other states looking at some things. We believe there are opportunities for us to really look at putting something together at the state level. So I would be remiss if I didn't say one last comment about our emergency management personnel. We can't have 9/11. Those poor first responders fought for how many years with Congress to get something done, to recognize the fact that cancers that they received as a result of their being a first responder on site at Ground Zero, that can't happen here. Not to our first responders. That can't happen to the residents. That can't happen to anybody in here. So it is incumbent upon us. Watchdogs continue to look at what's transpired and what is transpiring. So it's our job as government officials, and it's the public's job from a watchdog perspective. You can't sit down on this one. You can't take a seat. You have to be just as aggressive. What's the old adage about NIMBY? Not in my backyard. Well, this is your backyard. And we all need to be vigilant and really continue. So I applaud the local control, your police department as a former local official, and Commissioner Camp for the efforts that you were able to put forth and continue to drive home that message to us at the state level, but at the federal level as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it's very important for the residents who are here and the media who is here to realize that we almost have 25% of the House of Representatives here in Beaver County today to hear what we have to say. And I think it's important that they know their voices are being heard in Harrisburg. And I think by everyone here today showing up and listening, that says a lot. So we thank you for being here and supporting our efforts and holding Norfolk Southern accountable.
Thank you. Chairman Kill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Chair Camp. Thank you, Mike. For being here, for testifying. It's very much appreciated. I would just say that the issue with the beef that you mentioned, I'm not going to give you legal advice or anything like that, but I will say you have an actor that caused an incident that is causing harm to your business directly. It's something that ought to be looked at. And I think it's something that ought to be mentioned when you speak with Norfolk Southern tomorrow, that particular segment, because that's not just you. I've heard from my constituents in South Beaver as well, in Ohioville, even in industry as well. So I appreciate you raising that issue, and if you could raise that tomorrow with Norfolk Southern, I would very much appreciate it. Question. There was a mention of the $7 million, I believe, that is a floor. Chairman Matsey had mentioned that Governor Shapiro had mentioned from the railway. Is there discussion about how that money is going to be administered, and if it's going to come through the county or have local control, and if so, what's the plan from the county standpoint?
So Beaver County was contacted by Governor Shapiro and his administration last week sometime right after I believe they had the discussions with Norfolk Southern on the $7 million the state will be receiving, whether it's coming through the state or coming directly from Norfolk Southern. They asked us to do some research to see if there's any sort of nonprofit or authorities that we could run money through to help get out faster than going through the state. We told them, as a Board of Commissioners, we are on board with whatever we need to do to get this money to our residents as soon as possible. This $1 million is put away for the business community, and our community will be set for Beaver County and a few of the municipalities in Lawrence County. At this point, we haven't heard anything back from Governor Shapiro or his administration. I think we're going to raise those concerns on what the eligible expenses are. There's a lot of questions that we have, but also the concerns is, as Chairman Karen said, I don't think $1 million is enough to answer what they have done to our community. There's going to be a lot of businesses in the agriculture community that are affected by this, and also these other businesses I know that Chairman Marshall has visited in his district here in Darlington, that those road closures really affected their bottom line. So at this point, we were waiting to hear back from the Shapiro administration on how this money is going to be distributed. We offered our services here at the county to do so.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your leadership in this. You have done a phenomenal job, and the seriousness that you and your colleagues have taken this situation is very much appreciated.
Thank you. Representative Mays?
Gotta look around here. Hopefully it's for you, Mike.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity to be in your community and to learn about what you have gone through since this derailment and what it has meant for not only your short-term health and well-being, but what it might mean for the long-term health of your community. Thank you to all the testifiers, the leadership of this community. Thank you to our chairman for bringing us all together in a bipartisan way to really have the conversations that are important, not only for this community, but for communities that are facing this across our Commonwealth. I mean, Beaver County, this isn't the first time you've experienced disaster like this. This isn't the first time that you've experienced a derailment. And so what it makes me think about, and what it makes me wonder, is what is the long-term lasting and compounding effect on your community? You know, and so I think about the impact of companies bringing hazardous materials to and through your communities, what the impact is on your businesses, your air and water, your agriculture. None of that goes away when all of these agencies pack up after the emergency response is over. And so how can we be supportive in aligning our interests? Because I represent a very urban community down in the city of Pittsburgh. But guess what? Trains run through there too. So our interests are more aligned than we think, because I would hazard to say, or I would guess that you're probably dealing with health issues as well in terms of asthma and other respiratory issues, just from when there is not a derailment, just from the general operating of Norfolk Southern in our communities. So to me, I'm like, where's that opportunity for us, the whole corporate powers accountable for the harm and damage that they bring to our communities? And that's, to me, the opportunity in this conversation today. I think that we have to align around our interests to combat these hazards, whether it's our air and water, whether it's our businesses, whether it's our health. I think that is the opportunity here today. So my question is, you know, it shouldn't just be when there's an emergency that your community sees a benefit. What is the benefit to your communities from, you know, these corporations, even just bringing hazardous communities to and through hazardous chemicals to and through Beaver County and other places? So my question is for you all is, you've asked, how can we support you and how can we hold this company accountable? But I'm really curious to hear what you want. What is, outside of this emergency time, what is it that you would want over the long term to hold Norfolk Southern accountable? what does that accountability look like to you in a very complex way, not just for this emergency response?
Thank you. I think the majority of Darlington Township just wants to go back to where we was on February 1st. If we could get that continued testing going forward to help tell the story that everything is going to be okay, and if it's not, that all of you still have our back. We got to go back after Norfolk Southern. I think that's just all everybody wants.
Thank you for the question, and I think what the Board of Commissioners and I are trying to establish is some sort of program so that whenever a landowner in Beaver County sells their property, in 10, 15, 20 years, we can continue that testing. Now, we hope to see that funding come from Norfolk Southern, not the Commonwealth. We get unfunded mandates all the time down from the Commonwealth. We don't want you guys to have unfunded mandates. We would like funding to come from Norfolk Southern to be able to put in a pot of money, because just like all the representatives up here, the commissioners, Mike, we aren't going to be here forever, but this property is going to be here forever. So we want to see this continued testing from the baseline. Every educated well owner in the Darlington Township area understands that it takes a very long time for these contaminants to get down into their well. We're talking 20 years, if not longer, and I don't specialize in that, but that's a common sense thing. So we need to make sure we have this baseline testing, and we need to make sure that we offer anyone who was affected by this train derailment some sort of testing throughout many years, and that testing stays with the property and not the property owner.
And if I may just say, thank you. If I may just say, to talk about, have you explored a community benefit agreement with a company like Norfolk Southern?
So that's going to be in discussion tomorrow. Obviously, there are municipalities and there are counties surrounding Beaver County already filing lawsuits. We're going to have this discussion with them tomorrow to discuss our concerns of our residents for long-term testing, and we think that's what's really important.
Thank you.
We just found out that the state of Ohio just filed a lawsuit as well. Yeah. Representative Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll back up a little. I'm powerful. Before I say anything else or ask any questions, I just want you gentlemen and my colleagues and everybody in this room to understand my perspective. And the Norfolk Southern main line runs through the heart of the city of Altoona, runs through the very middle of our city. It bisects our city. When you grew up in the city of Altoona, as I did, and you lived there, you fall asleep at night to the sounds of train whistles and rolling stock. When I first learned of this derailment and I first saw the scope of what happened just a few miles up the road here on the Ohio line, I reached a conclusion. I don't think I can overstate how seriously I consider this event. I think this incident is the most serious man-made disaster that we have seen since Chernobyl. That's how seriously I take it. That's how seriously we need to take it, and that's how seriously Norfolk Southern needs to take it. I know Mr. Brewer isn't here, but I know he's your... Oh, is he? Where is he? Can I see? Is he here? That was kind of an alligator arm wave, I got to tell you. Mr. Brewer had submitted some written materials to us, and I just wanted to go through a few of those things with you. One of the things, and again, I want to focus a little bit on this controlled burn or controlled detonation. So it looks like Sunday night, February the 5th, everybody thinks there's going to be one controlled detonation on Monday around noon or so. February 6th, Monday morning, apparently a decision has been considered and reached by Norfolk Southern, I'm assuming unilaterally, overnight, that now they're going to increase this detonation to 5 cars. And when Director Padfield was here, he said when he found out about that, he called and talked to someone from Norfolk Southern, and they basically said, we've been doing this for 200 years. We have a lot of experiences with derailments. Well, they do have a lot of experience with derailments. Too much experience with derailments as far as I'm concerned. And that continues. I'm not great at math, But if you've got 200 years of experience with 140 derailments a year, that's 28,000 derailments. That's 28,000 derailments too many. And I can't believe that any company could claim to be a responsible corporate citizen with that level of derailments and that level of danger and that level of damage they cause to the communities that their rails run through. But I want to talk about what Mr. Brewer said. He talked about finding out about the decision to increase the number of controlled burn cars. And he said, this changed the entire plan because it was going to be a bigger impact to the area. The confusion was because Norfolk Southern officials did not communicate and were not in the room when the planning process was happening. Do you agree with that assessment?
Yes, I was there with Director Brewer, as my colleagues were as well. Norfolk Southern was not in the room. The command center was at a elementary school in East Palestine, where each office had their own separate incident command. We were all in the room with the governor. He was on the phone with Governor Shapiro. This did come in, and as Director Brewer said, as you probably read in there, at one point, they wanted to do the control, release, and burn at noon, as it was mentioned earlier. That would have created a 16-mile radius evacuation. And that now had us evacuating nursing homes, schools, our local hospital. This was all they then redid the map and realized that the 70% went down to less than 1%. So we were able to go back to that 1 mile evacuation that Beaver County has already done. We did it the day before. So we were prepared for that, but as Director Brewer mentioned in the written testimony, it's very detailed for the policy committee, both policy committees to read. There was no communication amongst Norfolk Southern and any of our first responders here in Beaver County and Ohio.
So Norfolk Southern reached this decision to go from 1 controlled burn car to 5 without any consideration or consultation with anybody here in Beaver County, as far as you know.
As far as I'm aware, there was no consultation. It was between Norfolk Southern and their contracted employee who eventually did that release and burn, to the point where when they were being questioned by the Shapiro administration and DeWine administration, they walked out of the room. Not Norfolk Southern, their contractor.
Did they say why they were walking out of the room?
Because they don't work for the state of Ohio.
Or apparently for the state of Pennsylvania either. One of the other things that Mr. Brewer did was he submitted a list of observations that were associated with the incident. The number one thing that he put on his list, the top of the list, transparency. There was a lack of transparency from Norfolk Southern. They needed to be upfront on what they planned to do. There cannot be confusion between the agencies during critical planning. Do you agree with that statement?
Yes, I agree with Director Brewer.
If we lived in a perfect world and this happened and you could have Norfolk Southern do anything that you wanted them to do in terms of communicating with you with regard to this unilateral decision that Director Padfield called jaw-dropping in his testimony, what would you have had them do with regard to that decision-making process?
Norfolk Southern, what I believe, should have done is sat down with each agency in a room and discuss what each rail car. Now, we had the manifest, as they reported earlier, on how the emergency services are able to see what rail car is carrying. But they needed to sit down and discuss what their next steps, step by step, was. As they said, everyone went to sleep Sunday night thinking it was under control. The next morning we wake up, it's more volatile. Their reasoning to do the controlled release and burn was because the temperature and it was getting so hot it could explode and cause shrapnel damage for miles away. So that was the only thing that was given to us. So what I would do, obviously I'm not in emergency management, there needed to be more transparency with our both federal and state and also our local, because our locals are the ones who control the incident command center on what the next steps will be and not them telling us what they're going to be doing.
So they kind of dictated to you what was going to happen.
Yes.
Would you have liked to have had some input into not just the decision itself, the substantive decision to move from 1 to 5 rail cars, but also the timing of the decision? Or the timing of the burn, I should say.
Absolutely. Fortunately, at that time, we were able, as Director Brewer mentioned in the testimony and Director Padfield earlier today, they wanted to do it at noon. At that time at noon, that's whenever they were thinking it was a 16-mile radius, so they were going to go off the wrong model. that would have caused chaos in Beaver County as the wind was coming towards us. We would have had to evacuate schools. We did take the approach of evacuating 2 high schools before lunch hour. They were able to get the bus there to send them home. We sent swift 911 messaging out. But there needed to be more of a coordinated approach on how we're going to do the control, release, and burn. I understand they believe that there was a time sensitive and they want to do it prior to nighttime.
And this was, I saw something, Supervisor Carrion, in your written materials. You had said that the week following this incident, Norfolk Southern announced that they would extend the inconvenience fee to all Darlington Township residents that were physically asked to evacuate, correct? What is that inconvenience fee?
So originally, they had the inconvenience fee of $1,000, and they wanted to do the 18 houses that were in the 1 mile. And with the confusion and the evacuation, there were people that were physically had somebody at their door knocking and asking them to leave. So Norfolk Southern agreed to extend the inconvenience fee to everybody that physically had somebody at their door.
Now you go on to say, we have pushed to have all residents eligible. Norfolk Southern has rejected our request on numerous occasions. Did they tell you why?
So the meeting we had with CEO Shaw, we pushed. Now in East Palestine, there was the same confusion: who was evacuated, who was not. And Norfolk Southern said, "We'll include all 44413, which is a zip code for." And if you bring that up on Google Maps, it gives you a pretty good outline of the zip code, and then you can do Darlington Township, pretty similar areas. And his statement to me was that Darlington Township was not as affected as East Palestine. I told him that I disagreed with that statement. Environmentally and in the 1 mile radius, I can agree with that. It's devastating in that area. But they opened the box up of going, there's spots that 2.5, 3 miles probably from the derailment out in Ohio. The statement was made to me that they would extend what they called a triangle, which was State Route 51 to Candleton Road, Township Road that goes on over to the state line, just a little triangle, maybe 200 and some residents, and they would pay everybody in that triangle. Everybody we sent after that meeting still was getting rejected. Now, you have to understand that they're also driving to New Waterford, which is 20 minutes the other, out in Ohio. They get rejected. They have to come all the way back over here to get a cover letter that says, hey, we live in this triangle, take it back out to there's been no financial center set up in Darlington Township. And then anybody that was not in that triangle, we was told they would look at on a case-by-case basis. And he just keeps saying over and over, we want to do right, we want to do right. Last night was our monthly township meeting. Half of the people that were here were speaking because they were 1.5 miles from the derailment and went out and they said, you're from PA, your address is not on this paper, go home. So clearly no attempt to do right.
They don't care.
No.
Okay. Well, gentlemen, thank you for coming in here today. God bless you. God bless everybody up here in Beaver County. We're thinking about you and hoping that things turn out as well as they can. I'm working on some safety legislation, some rail safety legislation. They say that we can't regulate the railroads, but I'm going to try and make things safer for you folks up here and all across the Commonwealth. And do me a favor, when you see them tomorrow, tell them I said hello. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And thank you. Thank you. We have 3 brief questions left. We'll start with Representative Benham.
Thank you, and thank you to the chairs of the policy committee and to our hosts as well as our testifiers. We're hearing a lot about corporate greed today, and particularly in this refusal to make you all whole on any number of levels, and that's the corporate greed that's happening after this incident. I think what makes me beyond furious, not just for the people of Beaver and Lawrence counties and East Palestine, but frankly for everyone who lives near a rail line, is the corporate greed that caused the conditions to exist in the first place that allowed this to happen. So I represent a densely populated area of Pittsburgh and a few sort of suburban boroughs very close to the city. And there are numerous rail lines that run through my district. We had previously experienced derailments prior to my time in office And I know that given the conditions that still exist, we are likely to experience one in the future, as will many places throughout the Commonwealth and our country. And so my question for both of you is, what do you know now that you wished you had known before this happened? And what lessons can I take back, not just to my community, but to Harrisburg, as we are considering potential regulations and other legislative changes? What lessons can I take back to both of those places?
Thank you very much. I think one of the things that, as a commissioner, that I am really going to focus on this next year is educating our residents on what travels through their communities. I don't think people realize that the chemicals and whatever it may be traveling through the communities on the railroad, and it's a bit of a surprise when something does happen. So, one of the things that you could take back, and I would recommend it, is just educating your residents, your constituents on, yes, there's rail that run through your community. This is what they are. Now, obviously, as we heard earlier today, we're not going to exactly know what's coming through those communities until something happens. They could say that it's because of a threat. That's what we're being told is, some things aren't told until something happens, because if there's a threat on that rail car, there could be something done to it. But I think that's what's really important, is educating the communities on what is going through their towns. And we have a lot of river towns here in Beaver County, and that's what's really being raised. It's coming to our office and then on our municipal level on, do we actually know what's coming through our communities?
Representative Otten.
Thank you. Sorry. What you just said about public awareness, that is one of the biggest factors to these issues. My community actually just wrapped up a lawsuit last year. It was called the Safety 7 lawsuit, if anyone wants to Google it. And it was a group of community members who sued based on the lack of public awareness, and that being a result of the corporation not providing the information. And so I think that public awareness piece is really important. And when we talk about aligned values and aligned goals, this is where all of our communities can come together and really push for that information that we need in order to keep the public aware and the public safe in situations like these, especially when, some of these lines are going through pretty densely populated areas where there are children playing, where there are schools close by, where there are nursing homes, all kinds of things that are in very close proximity to these transportation mechanisms. My question, actually, something that you touched on, can you clarify for me, I don't know that I'm correctly understanding the conversation and the difference between the 1 mile radius and the 17-mile radius. And then that relates to a question about a census of schools, nursing homes, childcare, and healthcare facilities. And was that a decision that was made to reduce it to the 1 mile radius? Was that a decision that was made to expedite the process? Or do you feel comfortable that that decision was made based on accurate science?
Yes. So as Director Burr put in his testimony, and Director Padfield earlier, was jaw-dropping whenever we heard it was going from 1 to 5 cars, the percentage of chemicals that were in those rail cars. I do believe, and this is myself saying this, that it was the right decision. Once we found out what was actually, the percentage was actually in those rail cars, we were already in a 1 mile evacuation zone. So this is not something we reduced. We just stayed status quo. Our emergency management coordinator here in Darlington Township is one of the ones who went door to door to those 22 residents that were displaced. But we had to prepare that once we heard it was 5 rail cars, and the initial model they put out to the stakeholders that were in the room, it really opened up Pandora's box when it came to school districts, nursing homes, child care facilities, hospitals that we had here in Beaver County. But I do believe that the model that they followed was the right one. But it goes back to the questioning that we had earlier from Representative Schmidt about the lack of transparency. This isn't something that should have been thrown onto us. This is something that we should have been able to talk as a whole group and not just told by Norfolk Southern and or their hired contractor that they brought up from, I think, Louisiana is where they came from.
And you said that you evacuated 2 high schools. I know that the DEP is monitoring well water, air quality for homes, but are they also monitoring these schools, these public facilities where lots of people gather? Kids are coming in and out from outside of the radius to these schools. So are they monitoring that as well?
Yes. So Chairman Karen might be able to just correct me if I'm wrong. Every resident in Darlington Township is well, correct? So there's no public water out here in Darlington Township. The school districts that were they're outside the radius, there's no school district in Beaver County that has well water. So they are on the public water system, so that we are regulating through our authorities across Beaver County to make sure that testing is continuing as they're I want to say they're upping their testing. They're doing more tests. We're in a project right now with Beaver Falls Water Authority where they cover a large number of municipalities in Beaver County. They are doing more tests than what is required by the DEP to make sure that they're providing safe water to their residents who they serve.
Our final question from Representative Nelson.
Thank you. And I want to, all of our communities have and unfortunately likely will go through something horrific. I thank you guys, unfortunately, for giving us the benefit of your experience. I am so sorry that we've having to benefit from your experience. I would be remiss if I didn't ask you to help me understand so that I can better prepare my community. How in the world you guys are able to and have been able to communicate effectively with your residents? And I suspect some of the folks who are here now are going to go back to their communities and tell their neighbors and things like that. But what does this look like? Who are those kind of, I'll call them unsung heroes, but the folks in your communities who've helped to make your response to this both holistic and whole, and allow you all to do the job that you guys are doing now, presenting what is an amazing amount of expertise, it seems, to us today?
You know, obviously I have to acknowledge the supervisors here in Darlington Township, because they're, as local officials, commissioners, and supervisors, our boots are on the ground, as are you when you're back in your district. But it's really important to recognize the work that they've done, because they're the ones probably getting more calls than the courthouse. You know, at the first week or so, as I said, we fielded hundreds of calls. We set up a hotline through our emergency management services. They fielded calls. But believe it or not, as Darlington Township has a good number of residents, there are more concerns outside of Darlington Township than just Darlington Township. You know, as we have representatives from Allegheny County here, this will affect probably in the future at some point. So what we're doing is just making sure that we contact anyone who contacts us. We're always making sure we reach back out. I know this Thursday, as Chairman Karen said, not that we're not received well in East Palestine, Ohio, but it seems like they want to take care of our own, so it's time that we take care of our own here. So this Thursday, we're having a resource fair, which we'll have representatives from DEP, Ag, or 911, DOH. So that's going to be a fair, just like a job fair, where we'll have tables set up and individuals who have questions can go and ask the questions and be pointed in the right directions and pass out any information that we have. I don't know, Mike, if you want to.
I'd just add that it's a big benefit to listen. Residents will come with their concerns. We've tried getting some out with social media. People would bring the concern that there's people not on social media. We sent mailers out, try to get a hold of those people. There was a concern about water. We had a lot of donations come in. That was a good opportunity to face-to-face talk to everybody as they came through. And we just tried to, anywhere we heard there was somebody that wasn't hearing communication, and I'm not going to say we didn't fall short. You can't get a hold of everybody, but it's a pretty good community, so everybody's kind of worked together to help make sure their neighbors know.
And I will tell you, I'm coming here from Montgomery County on the other side of the state. I've seen reps from my side, Montgomery, Bucks County. Know that you all have friends from across this entire Commonwealth who are standing here with you. It impacts us all, but also, again, my thanks to you guys and your leadership, and to all of the residents of the community for modeling what this needs to look like for the rest of us.
Thank you. And I just wanted to thank you all for your testimony, too, and thank everyone for being here today. Just before I hand it over to Chairman Kell, we did invite Norfolk Southern to join us today, and they respectfully declined. They did, however, provide written testimony. That testimony, as well as all the testimony given here today, can be found if you want to scan this QR code on the paper on your way out, and you can see a link to everybody who testified today. Chairman Kell.
Thank you, Chairman Bizzarro, Chairman Matsey, Chairman Marshall, and all the members that have come from all over the Commonwealth. I do appreciate you coming here to Beaver County to listen to what we heard today, and thank you to the testifiers and to the residents that came. Please feel free to reach out to our office. My staff is here. If you could wave, Monica and Vicky are right there. Feel free to reach out to our office if you have any additional questions. We'll help you get in contact with DEP or Department of Ag or whatever you need there. So thank you very much for being here.
And I'd just like to thank Chairman Bizzarro, Chairman Kell, for putting together this bipartisan policy committee. In my tenure in the General Assembly, this is the first time the policy committee has met jointly for something like this outside of Harrisburg. That's a big deal in 2023. You know, I say it all the time, and I've said it publicly, and I'm not afraid to say it here again. Jim Marshall and I are the chairs of the same committee, which is unusual for a community our side. He's a Republican, I'm a Democrat, but guess what, folks? We're friends. So let's continue in that vein as our session is underway here in Harrisburg, and as we advance. And remember, it's people before politics, and together I think we can get something done, hopefully to prevent something like this from happening again and to hold folks accountable. Thank you.
Chairman Marshall.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Bizzarro, Chairman Kale, Chairman Matsey. Rob said it best. We're friends, and we run the committee in a very bipartisan manner. I've always said we're co-chairs. I don't really look at a majority-minority chair. And I'm glad that the policy committee has taken this step to meet in a bipartisan manner. I think it's important to the citizens of our Commonwealth to see that we can work together on an important issue like this. And I hope we can continue to work together on every issue, because every issue is important to someone in our Commonwealth. It's great to have the diversity we have in this committee. As Chairman Camp said, I think it's more than 20% of the House of Representatives is here in Darlington. So I want to thank Supervisor Carrion and your supervisors, your community, your fire and police. Thank you for letting our house in your house today. When Chairman Kale said, where can we hold a meeting? I said, in the truck bay in Darlington, and then I asked permission. So thank you guys for making that happen. I'm glad we're here today, and you know, we hear you. We've heard you. We've been on scene. I've been on scene in East Palestine several times, and our county commissioners have as well. Jack, Tony, Dan, you guys have been amazing. Mike and your whole team, we really appreciate everything you've done for the citizens of Darlington and beyond. Thank you all for attending today, and God bless you. Safe travels to everyone.